Hello, BookTube. A little while ago, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club found himself thinking about me, specifically about how much I read. Now that would be a self-evident thing just from watching all of these videos that I make, but in addition to that, I've also given something like my stats. I read comparatively quickly, and I do an enormous amount of reading. In fact, now, for the last 10 years or so, I don't do anything else, or precious little else. I take care of my dogs, and I read. I don't have a 9-to-5 job. I don't have a social life. I barely see or socialize with any time-consuming friends or acquaintances or family members. I'm not even wearing pants. and that allows me to get a lot of reading done. A lot. And that's great. I wouldn't have it any other way. I pined for this freedom when I didn't have it. But Matthew was looking at the library in his tiny house, and he was thinking, I'm not belittling his house. He actually has one of those tiny houses. Absolutely fascinating. But he started to wonder, are there any of these books that I'm looking at that Steve actually hasn't read? So he made a video, and he made it a tag. I don't know what genius possessed him to do that, but he made a tag in which you pull 8 to 10 books off your shelf and wonder aloud, show them to your viewers, and wonder aloud whether or not Steve has read them. Maybe even cheekily assume that Steve has not. And I thought it was delightful. I found it through, I think, Jason Harrigan's channel, and went and watched it and thought it was fascinating. In the video, Matthew speculates that perhaps I am the most well-read person in the world. That is certainly not true. And it is certainly not even true that I read more than anyone in the world. That is certainly not true. But it was a fun speculation, and it was offered, I think, in fun. And his own track record for his video was 2. He mentioned 2 books that I had not read. And then he did the tag. And because his is a relatively small channel, I think that me seeing the tag and maybe a few of his followers seeing the tag would have been what could be expected, but instead it went viral. It is continuing to spread throughout BookTube, I guess, because people want to take a shot at me. The best possible way. They want to poke the bear. And so other people have done the tag, and the numbers have hovered around 2 or 3. 3 was reached by Samuel Darham, BookTube's resident playwright, who took what Matthew said, his speculation, his sort of tongue-in-cheek speculation that I may be the most well-read person in the world, and actually weaponized it by saying that I claim to have read every book in the world. I certainly do not, nor did the great exemplar of that claim, Samuel Johnson. That claim was made about him, and whenever he could do it at any kind of literary gathering or whatnot, he would shoot it down. He would say, Sir, I certainly have not. And I say the same. Of course, I have not read every book ever written, and of course I don't claim that. I barely make a dent in the new books that are coming out every year just in the American market. But one way or another, the combination of Matthew's characterization and Samuel's characterization, I think, if anything, has given this tag more fuel. And so many more people have done it. And the victory number has varied, but we have never yet cracked into the majority of a list. No list yet has had the majority of books that I haven't read, much less all of them. And there is a winner. We did have a winner, Hannah at Hannah's Books. It's always the quiet ones. She made a list of books, and she reached 4 titles that I had not read, including one of hers. And the tag has gone on since then, and I mean to do video responses to all of them, because really this isn't poking the bear. Really, this is people going to their bookshelves, finding books they haven't read in a long time, or that mean a lot to them but that are very niche or whatnot, and wondering if I've read them, what I think about them. And you could wonder that with anybody, and that's I think the heart and soul of this little corner of BookTube that we have, where we just talk about books so enthusiastically. And I'm seeing a lot of books that I don't think I would have seen otherwise, that I wouldn't have heard about on BookTube otherwise. Kathy Grimm talked about the fantasy novels of her mother, that it turns out I have read. That's a connection. That's a bookish connection that we should all treasure. Those are wonderful. But in the cold, hard light of reality, Hannah is still on the top of the mountain. She is still the champion. And today we're doing another iteration of this tag. I am behind, but that's because I'm a little bit under the weather, so I didn't make any videos this weekend. But today we're doing Peggy at the History Shelf. She is doing the Has Steve Read It tag, and she's on perilous ground. We've already seen people venture onto perilous ground. James Holder, for instance, actually made most of his tag about science fiction and fantasy, a genre on which I have wasted many a youth. And Peggy even more so. She's making her tag here about history. So it's daring on her part. I can't help but notice a theme running throughout a lot of her choices, and actually it was a theme that ran throughout a lot of Hannah's choices too, and actually garnered her the crown, which is the prevalence of what we could call historical intellectual history. So not a minute-by-minute recount of the Battle of Vicksburg, but instead tracing some intellectual tradition throughout history. And I don't know why that would be prevalent. Is it that booktubers are thinking that I'm too impatient to read such things, or maybe too dumb? One way or another, there's an intriguing thread of that running throughout. So I thought we'd go through her books and see how we do. First one that she picks is a minor book, and it's an obscure book, and it is great. It is a fantastic book. If you are interested in the subject of Russia, you have to read this book. It's The Agony of the Russian Idea by Tim McDaniel. The book came out in 1996. I have read it. I thought it was fantastic. I wish that I had a copy. It's one of the many sort of niche history meditations that I get, I read, I review. Nowadays I review, not in 1996, but nowadays I do it, and then somehow get rid of. I have so many of those, so many what we could call historical intellectual histories that I have got rid of. What was that book a few years ago, just a couple of years ago, that big book on the work of the dead, on how historically people have viewed what the dead do? That was terrific, absolutely terrific. I looked for it the other day, spurred by some other book that I was reading, and realized that I had gotten rid of it. And the same thing is true with The Agony of the Russian Idea. I got rid of it, but what Peg may be a little too young to realize is that I lived through the Cold War, and the Russians were on our minds a lot. So of course I was going to be drawn to read this book. Then the second book is even dicier. It's a classic in its own way. It's a classic. It's also a brilliant work, and it's The Pursuit of the Millennium by Norman Cohn. This is also a yes. I have read this book. I wish that I had a copy. Again, I don't have it. I wish I did. It's all about the millenarian cults of the Middle Ages, when as arbitrary and silly a thing as the numbers on a calendar suddenly caused a whole bunch of people to fly into a whole bunch of intellectual fervors. And the author does an incredibly comprehensive job of going through those manias and grounding them. It's not an easy read, but it's fantastic. Just a fantastic book. Again, wish I had it. Then the next one is Icarus Fallen by Chantal Delsol. And this is a no. I have not read this book. I don't think I've ever even heard of it. And when Peg's comment about it, I'm going to quote it so that we can capture its full horror. Her comment about it is, "I enjoy reading political philosophy from time to time." I would have thought, up until watching her video, that was a line no one could say unironically. To put it mildly, I don't enjoy reading political philosophy from time to time. I do it reluctantly, as one has one's teeth cleaned, but that's about it. So that one's a no. Then the next one's a little strange. That again, in every one of these tags, there are at least a couple of choices where it's strange that the person would think I hadn't read the book. Not a long shot, but just downright strange. And that is the Memoirs of Julia Dent Grant. General Grant's wife, long-suffering wife. And she wrote these memoirs late in her own life, and they were published long after that. And they were edited, a really masterful job editing, done by John Simon. And the original appearance of these things in the 70s had a preface by Bruce Catton, the greatest American Civil War historian of them all. and one of those writers for whom I want to read everything. But even if he hadn't been involved, this is still fascinating. It's facile, and it's full of hot air, the way her husband was, and it's incredibly self-justifying. It's not a memoir to be taken accurately. It's not a memoir that in any way assesses the person's own past. It was compared in some circles to Mary Chestnut's Civil War diary, and I thought that comparison was both true and unhelpful, since in both cases you have a woman, for her own personal reasons, lying her face off and then publishing it. So, but it is fascinating to do, especially since Grant's memoir, significantly proofread by Mark Twain, has been overpraised to the point of ridiculousness. Serious writers and opinionizers, especially in my own book trade, have called it the greatest memoir in American history, the greatest work of nonfiction in American history, the greatest autobiographical reflection in American history. And I've never known what to say about that. There are 20 memoirs by Civil War generals that are better than this, let alone Henry Adams or anything like that. But it's especially interesting to read Mrs. Grant's memoirs in light of, all the hot air that's been pumped into her husband's memoirs. So that one's then the next one is yes, and it is also historical intellectual history. It is The Moral Disarmament of France by Mona Siegel. This came out in 2005, so right before I would have paid it critical attention, right before I got back into book reviewing, and I would have loved it if it had been during my ambit, because maybe I'll get an anniversary reprint, because the book is wrong. It's very deeply, very seriously wrong in a lot of ways. The main thesis of the book is that school teachers, in the wake of World War I and the slaughter on the Somme and whatnot, conducted what was essentially a pedagogical disarmament of the next generation of French school children, touting for them the horrors of war and how anything is preferable and whatnot. And I don't know how you can read this book and then say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, I think that's entirely true, and then face a 100-year-old French veteran who fought against the Germans as they encroached on his homeland, or face a 100-year-old member of the French resistance who risked everything and the lives of everyone they knew, who watched pets being strangled, and who risked being drip-fed acid in a cellar somewhere in Paris. I don't know how you could look such people in the face and say, well, you were preconditioned to surrender. You were preconditioned to hate war so much that you valued peace above your own country. It's a fairly well done book, but I disagreed with almost every page of it. Almost every page of it. It's an easy thing to do. It's an easy thing to look back and make a theory like this, but I considered it largely ahistorical, and that is really bad for intellectual historical history. So I read it, but I didn't like it. I don't recommend it. Then the next one is great. The next one is the exact opposite. It's searing. It will stick with you it will haunt you forever. It will make you think about everyone you know in a new light. Right now, in 2019. It's Believe and Destroy by Christian Ingrao. It's, again, historical intellectual history, and this is it's a history, lots and lots of potted biographies, lots and lots of primary research. It's a history of the young German men who were just in the flower of their youth and young manhood when the Nazis came to power and then became a dictatorship, became a tyranny, who didn't go along to get along, didn't leave the country, didn't resist, but who instead had their intellectual armature subverted, or intentionally subverted it themselves, to the SS, to the Einsatzgruppen, to the German party's ruthless, vicious, genocidal security forces. The book is never so simple as this, but the book is taking aim partially at the idea that it was the dim-witted, the hoodwinked, and the thuggish who filled the ranks of those Nazi apparati, when in fact that wasn't always true. And the far more disturbing exceptions were the people who knew better, who you would expect to know better, the widely read people, the cultural people, the aesthetically refined people, these young men who they were one of the many institutional failures that allowed Nazism to come to power. One of those institutional failures was, of course, that the old line army officers didn't simply take Hitler behind a building and shoot him in the head the minute they realized what he wanted. All of them should have done that. He was prostrating their honor, which was centuries old, for madness and spittle-flecking bigotry, and they knew it, and they didn't do it. They plotted many times, more of them plotted than history tends to remember, but they didn't do it. And when he was in 1935, they easily could have, and they didn't. That was one institutional failure. Another huge institutional failure on the part of 1930s Germany was these young men. These are the people who should have shut this whole thing down, and who could have done it, not only by attacking its governmental underpinnings, its legal underpinnings, but also by going to the people. And they didn't do it. Instead, they lent it their considerable intellectual energies. And this book delves into that just unblinkingly, just completely unblinking. It's one of the masterpieces of historical intellectual history on this list. Peg actually picked a few masterpieces. I strongly advise that you read it. I'm not going to make facile comparisons to 2019. It's important to know on its own right, because the question always comes up: how could the most cultured and refined country in the world in 1933, how could that country have sunk into barbarism, the worst barbarism that the world has ever seen in the West? How could that have happened? Those two things, the most cultured country should have been the first to fall and the first to be enslaved by a country that sunk to the depths of barbarism, but it shouldn't under any circumstances have been the same country. And people have always asked, why? How could that possibly be? And a crux of how that could possibly happen is in this book. I don't know how available it is, but it deserves a reprint. Then the next one is a yes, and it's a resounding yes. Again, I'm not 100% sure why Peg would think that I wouldn't seek this out and read it. It's a great memoir. It's called Fault Lines by David Pryce-Jones. It's from 2015, and it's a memoir of his extremely colorful and celebrity-filled life. And unlike most memoirs of extremely colorful and celebrity-filled life, I'd say probably only 60% of this is completely manufactured out of whole cloth, which is a pretty high percent. 40% is a pretty high percent of reliability for a book of this kind, but it doesn't matter, because this author is such a great storyteller, honed as a storyteller for an entire lifetime of writing. Never a day when he didn't write, never an experience that he didn't delineate in prose somehow. And you do that all the time. You get better at it, even if you don't have any talent. And he has lots of talent. So I don't have any idea how available Fault Lines is, but it's a terrific book, just terrific, about the 20th century, really. Then at this point, Peg was winding up, and she mentioned, as I presume a kind of taunt, that there was a book. She held up a book that she was not going to include on the list because she was, by implication, sure that I hadn't read it, and that wouldn't be fair because it's a textbook. And what did she hold up? An absolute institution of a textbook that, like some of the textbooks we've seen in my library tour, has been widely read by a general audience, including this general audience. It's Chinese Civilization, a Sourcebook, which if you go to a used bookstore, you're likely to see a copy. It's had thousands and thousands and thousands of editions have been printed. It's a well-known textbook, and the reason that it gets a wide readership outside of academy is that it's so well done. It's so energetically done. The introductions, the footnotes, the choices, the translations, it's all just amazingly done. It's an amazing book on its subject. Much like the editors are escaping me, but there's a source book on Roman history. It's the same way. It's 2 volumes. Is it Synogen and Boke? On the Republic, 1 volume on the Republic, 1 volume on the Empire, with, again, lots of interstitial exposition and tons of notes, and amazing work. So I have, in fact, read the book that she thought was unfair to list, because I certainly hadn't. Okay? But the last book on her list is another masterpiece of historical intellectual history, although not quite historical in this case. Very much alive, very much hot button. And the author of the book realized that since these are live issues, since you can go into halls and various subterranean meeting places and actually find people living this as it's unfolding, it's my duty as a historian to be even more objective, to be even more removed in order to get them to talk and in order to hear what they're saying. And the result of that distancing is to make it an incredibly chilling book. The book is from 2002. It's by Carol Swain, and it's called The New White Nationalism in America, in which the author studies the subject with as little spleen as possible to find out who these people are, who these men are, why they're acting the way they are, and what their goals are. And their goals are, as I've mentioned on this channel a few times, their goals are frankly terrifying. Their goal is to subject you, not some amorphous, impersonal you, but you personally, you listening to me right now. Their goal is to subject you to a very detailed purity test and to kill you if you fail. Now, and if you want to call that alarmist, then you haven't studied the subject. Their goal is to subject you to a purity test. Are you a good white Aryan? And if you aren't for obvious reasons, if you're the slightest shade brown or the slightest bit openly sympathetic, then they don't need to test you. But if you look right, if you act right, so in other words, if you look white and if you act heterosexual, that's the word, that's what we mean by right here. If you act heterosexual, then you get the purity test. And if you fail, you die. And this author looks at that world in this book, and it's amazing. And to call it prescient is a huge understatement. White nationalism in America has blossomed since 2016, by vast amounts, by absolutely vast amounts. We have a sitting congressman who calls himself a white nationalist and asks, when did that become a bad thing? When did it become a bad thing to call yourself that? The president of the United States is a white nationalist, a white ethno-state proponent. And his main henchman is right now, as we speak, enacting a white ethno-state on the southern border. And the president of the United States has said, well, I'm a nationalist. Or when did that become a bad thing? So to put it mildly, white nationalism in America has had an enormous resurgence since this book came out. But I don't think, off the top of my head, I can't think of a better study that it's had, even though this is old, even though there's a lot more data to this book now. So again, I strongly recommend it. It is a great recommendation on Peg's part, and I wholeheartedly second it. And at the end of her video, when she was done waving her red flag at the bull, she mentions that her partner, Martine, her significantly better half, had a suggestion as well. She wanted to shoehorn in from the sidelines. She wanted to shoehorn in a question of whether or not Steve has read, because Martine doesn't have her own channels, and her question was Douglas Hill's last Legionary books. And this brought me right back to James Holder, who filled his tag with schlocky science fiction and fantasy. No, he did quite a bit that was good, but if we're talking about metal spinner rack, drugstore, dry goods store book selections of old science fiction and fantasy, you're treading onto, they're both on perilous ground. And yeah, I have read Douglas Hill. Yes, I have wasted the time to read The Last Legionary and all the books, as far as I know, unless he's one of these authors who wrote a schlock classic, 18 million years ago, and has recently started writing new editions of that, or his estate has, or something like that. As far as I know, I've read all the Last Legionary books. They are... Peg says in her video that Martine wonders if I know where I could find a copy. I don't, and I don't advise you to read it either. It's a waste of your time. It's really terrible, but still really enjoyable. Maybe that's why maybe she wants to recapture that joy, but I have no idea where you would find a copy. If the science fiction genre has any self-respect, it will never reprint these books. So, but anyway, that was the Has Steve Read It the History Shelf edition. And if you were keeping track at home, then you realize that out of the 8 books, 9 if we include the one that Peg was, he certainly hasn't read this one, it was only one that was a no. So Hannah's rule is not challenged here. Hannah is still comfortably, smugly at the top of the mountain. But who knows if that will continue? How long can she stay up there, fending off all comers? Now that I'm back on camera, I will just continue to do these, and I don't know that I can keep up with them because Matthew hit a home run on his first tag. But I'll try, and we'll see if someone can do better than 4. 4. I think. I mean, we're doing 8 to 10 books. That's not much. No one's got halfway yet. I think we could probably do better. Dig deep into your most cobwebby and recessed bookshelves. But as long as you remember some basic rules, don't pick something that's so incredibly obscure that of course no one has read it. Of course I haven't read it. You want to give me at least a fighting chance. But the History Shelf gave me a fighting chance and lost really bad. Was pounded face first into the mud of the song. So you win some, you lose some rather badly. But anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.